morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told out of Voice of Radio. So today, we need to take a look at the top 5 decks in the Pokemon trading card game. You see, Vivid Voltage is just about to be legal for tournament play. That is coming up in the very near future. So you know what? Seems like it is about time that we sat and had a look at what the top 5 decks are going to be with Vivid Voltage legal. Now, obviously, there is a little bit of projection happening on my part here. We don't actually know what the top 5 decks are going to be. We haven't been playing. But Japan have been playing. And we've been playing with all the cards not in Vivid Voltage, and we can mash our experiences pre-Vivid Voltage with Japan's experiences with Vivid Voltage, and I think we can make a pretty good list of the top 5 decks in the game right now. So starting off at number 5, it's an old favourite, it's Blacephalon. Blacephalon has been one of the top decks ever since it came around in Unbroken Bonds, and it doesn't look like it's going anywhere anytime soon. We're playing it primarily for the Fireball Circus attack that for free energy does 50 damage for each fire energy you discard from your hand. And the theory with Blacephalon is incredibly simple. You can get a one-hit KO on literally any deck whatsoever, just so long as you get enough energy in hand. So all of those free prize VMAXs, something like an Eternatus with 340 HP, if you can get 7 fire energy in hand and free on Blacephalon, one hit KO for free prizes on a single prize Pokemon. And if Eternatus doesn't KO Blacephalon back, then you don't need to get the energy on Blacephalon, you just need 7 energy next turn to do it all over again. And the 120 HP is sneaky high, because it means that something like Hooper is going to be just out of range. Something like a Volcanion is going to be just out of range. It sneakily avoids some big non-GX, non-V Pokemon getting KOs on it. Of course, we've got Welder to get the energy onto it, and then we've got Giant Half to search the energy out from our deck, and we've got Fire Crystal and Energy Retrieval to get the cards back, the energy cards, from our discard pile. And we all thought that Fiery Flint going away was going to make the deck worse, and a lot of people thought that Fiery Flint going away was going to make the deck no longer viable. Well, it's not quite as good as it used to be without Fiery Flint, but it's still a pretty gosh darned good deck indeed. It looks like it shouldn't work. It looks like having to get the Welder and the free energy, 2 with Welder, 1 normally, every turn, plus X number of energy in your hand, is just going to be too much, especially given that a lot of the time you need the Blacephalon and you need a way to get it in the active. But you play Jirachi, and you play Zacian, so you've got a good turn 1 option, and you play Oricorio, and you probably play Dedenne, and between all of these cards, you actually end up getting this working far more than you think you probably should. In at number 4, we've got Coalossal VMAX. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this is the big new deck that's coming around in Vivid Voltage. I could be wrong, of course, but this to me seems like it has the best chance of just being a phenomenal card and a phenomenal deck. Now, Coalossal V, I have very little love for. I don't think it's a good card at all. When I initially looked at it, my headline was, what's the point? But Coalossal V Max, I feel very differently about. Coalossal V Max has got the attack Eruption Shot. For 1 fighting energy, you do 40 damage, then you discard the top card of your deck, but if that card is an energy card, then you do 90 more damage, and attach that energy to this Pokemon. And what's really important to note here is that this does not have to just be a basic fighting energy. It can be a stone fighting energy that reduces damage done to you by 20. It can be a weakness guard energy, which takes away your, well, weakness, to be blunt. Any of these can be attached there and you are good and off to go. And then, of course, the theory is that once you've got 4 energy on there, you're doing 240, and 240 isn't phenomenal for 4 energy. But bearing in mind, Eruption Shot should already have done 130 damage because you hit an energy, which means that the two attacks together do 370, and now you are getting a nice easy one-hit KO on anything. Okay, fine, there are some things like Zamazenta that will block you with an ability that makes it immune to VMAXs, but outside of those rare exceptions, anything. And that's what's so good here. You're hitting a phenomenal weakness against things like Eternatus VMAX, like Pikachu VMAX, like Vikavolt, which is awesome. And then, after all of that, you're basically two-hit KOing anything, and you're pretty much good to go at that stage. And that's why I love this. Getting the energy on top of your deck should be a given because you've got Oranguru. Swap a card in your hand with the top card of your deck. So as long as you've got an energy in hand, you're absolutely golden here because you just make sure that you have an Oranguru on the bench to put it on top. Yes, fine, it's lost a little bit of something here because it used to be that we would have Macargo that would actually let you search for a card, any card, and put it on top of your deck, so you could easily manipulate which energy was on top of your deck. But make no mistake about it, Coalossal VMAX, it's hitting a phenomenal weakness. Even when it's not, it should be two-hit KOing basically anything. It destroys single-prize Pokemon with the first attack. Not to mention being a fighting Pokemon, you got Martial Arts Dojo for a little bit of extra damage. You can always use Karate Belt to reduce the cost of the attack, etc. And I think we are absolutely in for one of the best decks in the format. Could be wrong, but I do believe that Coalossal is here, and I do believe it is here to stay as one of the big players in the game. In at number 3, we've got Zacian with Lucario and Melmetal. This is a deck that I don't particularly like playing myself. In preparation for the Players' Cup, have I mentioned I'm casting it? I'm so excited! I have been basically just hammering game after game after game with, well, all of the top meta decks to really make sure I understand the decks that are absolute fullest. I've been playing a lot. And this is the big meta deck that I just don't get on with. It's just not for me. It's kind of a slow, plodding deck, which is very much not my style. I'm a very aggressive player. But the theory is rather simple. You're hitting for 230 damage, which is very, very nice. That's good for free energy. You've got the Intrepid Sword ability, which lets you draw 3 cards but ends your turn. But if you're not attacking, it's turn 1, etc., that's fine. Also worth bearing in mind that any energy basic metal that you draw with Intrepid Sword you can attach to Zacian, though you don't have to, it is up to you, which is actually kind of important. And that's a really nice attacker and it gets you rolling as a draw engine, but really this is a tanky build. You use Lucario and Melmetal. Now, Lucario and Melmetal, very good tag team GX, got a GX attack that says for the rest of the game, your Pokemon, your Metal Pokemon, take 30 less damage from attacks, which is kind of awesome. You then combine that with Metal Goggles, which says that the Pokemon it's attached to take 30 less damage from attacks, and you've got a really tanky build. You're going to play it with Mallow and Lana that switches while healing 120 damage, and it means that if you're not one-hit KOing Zacian, you're going to have a very hard time KOing it at all. There are some decks like Centiskorch which are going to have a fairly easy time here. Incidentally, that didn't make my list of top 5 decks with Vivid Voltage legal in the format, but it came very close. It was one of the last ones to be cut. The deciding factor was essentially that in the big Japanese tournament they had with Vivid Voltage legal, it didn't have a good enough showing. And even though it's been a good deck pre-Vivid Voltage, it's not been the number 1 deck. So that combined with, honestly, it just did not show up. There was a really big 1,500 person Champions League in Yokohama, and Centiskorch just did not show up. Now, they were playing a kind of pre-rotation format, which I get, but it just did not show up, like, at all. So that's why it ended up getting cut from the list. Similarly, Pikachu and Zekrom, very, very good deck. And honestly, I know that a bunch of people watching are going to be surprised to see Pikachu and Zekrom missing from this list. And I get that entirely. But the fact of the matter is, I do think Coalossal is going to be a really big player. And Coalossal destroys Pikachu and Zekrom, like hilariously easily. So Pikachu and Zekrom again came very close. I did not forget it. I considered it very strongly. I chose not to put it on the list. Now, one of the things that, to go actually back to the deck we're talking about, that this list used to play to deal with stuff like Center Scorch was the Bronzong from Team Up, which is immune to fire Pokemon. But the issue with that is that Center Scorch players, etc., just started playing Cramorant V, which with a Welder and one other attachment could get an easy one-hit KO, and it basically made it a little bit pointless, which has made the deck a little bit worse. But you've still got Zamazenta, which will block VMAXs, and the Vs that evolve into VMAXs generally cannot deal with a Zamazenta, which is taking 60 less damage from attacks. Center Scorch being the obvious exception, Center Scorch does have a very good matchup against this. But the fact of the matter is, this deck is so difficult to actually take out if you don't have a direct counter, that I do feel confident putting it at number 3 on this list. And I know there were a few people out there who played this pretty much entirely in qualifying for the Players' Cup and did very, very well indeed. And I don't think there's anything in Vivid Voltage which is going to really challenge this. In at number 2, we've got Eternatus VMAX. Now, my journey through all of the metagame decks lately has led me to realise that I actually really enjoy playing Eternatus VMAX. It's my favourite in terms of just having a fun deck to play. Eternatus VMAX lets you have 8 bench Pokemon, which is awesome for playing stuff like Galarian Zigzagoon. When you bench it, you get to place a damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon. And then it's got an attack for just 2 energy that lets you do 30 damage for each of your Darkness Pokemon in play. I should mention your 8 bench spaces are on the proviso that you only play Darkness Pokemon. But essentially what we end up with here is 270 damage for 2 energy, which is frankly ridiculous. Not to mention, you know, something like an Arceus and Algar and Palkia, all you need to do is just drop 1 Galarian Zigzagoon, and then you get a KO with Eternatus. If you go first against Arceus and Algar and Palkia, you should win if you get set up quite nicely. At least that's been my experience. It's a very nice deck. The fact that it does take 2 energy can be a little bit of a pain, because Crushing Hammers are everywhere at the moment, and if your opponent hits quite well on Crushing Hammer, that can be an absolute pain. But do remember that Eternatus V has an attack which lets you attach an extra energy from your hand, and we do see that some builds play Turbo Patch, which is basically it is just a reverse Crushing Hammer to help try and sort it out. But the fact of the matter is, one of the reasons I put Eternatus so high on this list, other than, you know, results, is the fact that it's just that deck that can beat anything. Because you are almost certainly, because you're playing so many Crobat, because of the whole 8 bench spaces, only playing Darkness Pokemon, you rarely have a bad start with this deck, and you're hitting pretty big damage pretty quickly. And honestly, the bad games I've had with this deck are just I couldn't find the VMAX, because you tend to play Quick Ball to get your basics and just hope you draw the VMAX, which doesn't always work, but hey-ho. And yeah, it's just a great deck with great power. And again, I do think Coalossal VMAX is a bit of an issue for it. But the real difference between this and Pikachu and Zekrom is that Eruption Shot does not get a one-hit KO, unless they're behind on prizes and have a martial arts dojo, in which case it actually does, but that's the only way. And you can kind of trade with them. So although I do think this has a bad Coalossal matchup, I think it has such good matchups against everything else, and I do think that it can stand up to Coalossal if you have a fast enough start. Look, let's be clear, it's still a dodgy matchup. But in at number 1, it's the deck that doesn't really have any dodgy matchups. It's Zacian with Arceus and Algar and Palkia. It's just annoying how good this deck is. And I don't really see this not being the top deck, or at least pretty gosh darn close to it, unless Pokemon prints a direct counter to it, or it gets rotated out. You've got ADP's GX attack that says for the rest of the game, all your attacks do an extra 30 damage, and you take an extra prize with every KO you take. You then combine that with Zacian, and all of a sudden you're doing 260 damage while taking an extra prize for every KO. And it's just ridiculous. You can just end up using boss's orders to drag like a Dedenne and a Crobat into the active, and boom, you win. That's the game. ADP's matchup against Eternatus a lot of the time is just, I'm going to boss his orders 2 with your Crobat and take 3 prizes off each of them. Because Eternatus' HP is too high. Why bother? Just go after the Crobat. It is a ridiculous deck which has just been absolutely crushing the format for a while now. And sometimes a Zacian with Lucario and Melmetal can tank rather nicely against it, which is quite cool. Sometimes decks like Coalossal can just outspeed it and get big damage onto the field. Sometimes Blacephalon can take big KOs turn after turn and win. It's not an unbeatable deck. And I do think that if Eternatus goes first and has a decent start, they will win most of the time. At least that's been my experience. And incidentally, that is one of the reasons Eternatus ended up at number 2 on the list, because I do think that if you have a good start, it actually has a better matchup against Zacian ADP than the other decks around. Frankly, ladies and gentlemen, Zacian ADP is the deck to beat right now, and I don't see that changing in the near future. Maybe if we had a fairy Pokemon to try and take down ADP, but fairy Pokemon don't exist anymore, so cheers for that. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. As far as I am concerned, those are the 5 best decks in the game with Vivid Voltage legal. But as always, there is a healthy amount of opinion and supposition in this video. So that means we can have a good old-fashioned, good-natured argument about it in the comment section. Tell me your top 5 decks. Go nuts. Be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCG Radio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.